I went through a pretty fallow time in around about 89, 90. I had no idea what to write about. It was my job to write songs, but I really had no clue as to what area I should write about. So I thought, well, I better write about me. I better try and figure out where I've come from, who I am. And so my thoughts went back to my hometown, my upbringing, my life as a child, And I just started to write down a series of images that were meaningful to me, ships, rivers, old churches, a decaying industrial economy, an area rich in historical artifacts and ruins, a very cold wind from the Baltic, a tradition of seafaring and shipbuilding and coal mining and dysfunctional families and drinking and pride. All of those things were kind of came flowing out. Once I decided that that's what I was going to write about, it almost wrote itself. But at the time I felt very bleak, and that was reflected in the work that I made eventually. It was a very bleak record, apart from the odd flash. But it's probably the record I'm most proud of. In a way, it's probably my best work. I'm very proud of my upbringing. I'm proud of where I come from. I come from a pretty tough town. At the same time, to find myself, I needed to leave. I needed to go into the world. I'm glad I did that. I have no regrets about that. At the same time, I have a great deal of affection and love for the place I came from. This is the Tyne Bridge. This was actually the prototype for the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It's a smaller version of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but they wanted to make sure that this design would work, so they built it across the Tyne, and it still works. Well, that's the quayside. They have a Sunday market there, every Sunday, of course, and it's a great market. I used to go there as a child. That's the high-level bridge, and the new suspension bridge, which is kind of ugly. And this is the gentrification of the river. As the sort of industrial basis of the town evaporates, it's becoming more and more tidy and something like gentrified. Wallsend is the town I'm from, and it was called Wallsend because it's the end of Hadrian's Wall. It's where they finished it. What puzzled me is why the Scottish people didn't just go around it, go to Tynemouth and come around it. They're trying to rebuild the Roman wall here in this picture. I think these are excavations under the house where I used to live that was knocked down, and they found this Roman camp. Yeah, this was the view out of my window as a child of lots and lots of cranes, many more cranes than this, because over the last 20 years the shipyard has kind of run down to the point now where it's totally closed. It's gone. 200 years of industrial history have just been vanished. This is Tynemouth Castle at the mouth of the Tyne. I think it was inhabited by monks a lot of the time, and they were invaded by the Danes, and I think Henry VIII actually burnt it down during the Reformation, but it's a magnificent ruin. We used to play in there as children. I think I lost my virginity on this pier here. Underneath it, there's a tunnel, very dark tunnel down there. I've fallen off these cliffs many a time. This is a tombstone, weathered by the sea. God knows how old that is. My first wedding, my first marriage happened in a church just down the hill here from the castle, overlooking the river. Okay, this is my school, and it looks pretty horrific, and my memories of it are that it was pretty horrific. It looks like a Gothic nightmare that Vincent Price should have inhabited. I did try going back once, but I got scared again. I got very afraid. I got very anxious. My mouth was dry, my stomach was heaving, and I left. Well, these were my classrooms. There were a thousand boys in my school. It's actually a good school, but it was just a very daunting place. Guildhall. I used to play here on every Sunday morning. This is on the quayside with a big band, the 25-piece big band, and I think we made about £5 each every Sunday, which at the time in the 70s was quite a bit of money. You could buy lunch for that for two people, and we were always drunk. I mean, it didn't sound very good at all, but it was always packed with students, and we used to play Count Basie arrangements and Duke Ellington arrangements badly, but I learned a lot with that band. Mainly how to drink. This is the Gosforth Hotel. There's a little room upstairs here that this big band used to play in originally, and I inherited the venue for a band called Last Exit. We play there Wednesday nights. We charge something like 20p to get in, and again there was a four-piece band. We made about £5 each, and there was no stage at the time. We just used to play in a corner of the bar on the floor, all plug into one amplifier. People liked it. There's a lot of bingo in Newcastle. I was a bingo caller in the Spanish City, in it's a sort of amusement park in Whitley Bay, and we used to affect Cockney accents to call the bingo. Say, house is called, don't move your markers, wait for the check. Was she worth it? 7 and 6. Doctor's orders, number 9. That kind of thing. Kelly's Eye, number 1. Newcastle is called Newcastle because it's actually a new castle. There was a previous one, and then they built this new one, which I don't know the date. It was probably something like 11th century. And it's a Norman keep, and I've never been in it, actually. It's right in the centre of town. It's the sort of thing you kind of ignore, but that's what the town's named after. Well, it wasn't intentional to make birds symbolic, but they are traditionally symbolic of death. Birds on the roof of a house mean there's going to be a death in the house. So. I'm not sure whether I put those birds in deliberately or whether they just sort of appeared there by accident. Ships are very powerful symbols in your psychology, particularly mine. They symbolize travel. They symbolize death in a way. They're like massive coffins. They also like upside down churches, if you think about it. Or maybe a church is an upside down ship. They carry you to different places. In ancient symbology, that the ship would carry you to the underworld or the next world or whatever. Whether any of this was sinking into my psychology as a child, I do not know. I mean, maybe this is something I've learned since. But it was a very powerful symbol to be brought up next to this enormous ship that would blot out the sun and be much taller than the houses, 3 or 4 times the size of your house. And then it would be gone, never to come back. The ship would be too big to come back to port. The song is lighthearted in many ways. It sounds lighthearted, and yet the subject matter is kind of odd and a little dark. It's really about the singer's wanting to bury his father, but bury him at sea and not in the traditional way of burying him in a churchyard. He wants to escape all of that. He wants to escape culture, basically, the rituals of his culture. And there are priests in the song, the guy's lost his faith in the church. He doesn't think that the rituals that they serve up are adequate for what he wants to express about his father. It's quite there's a lot of stuff in this song about history and faith and death. I don't know whether it works as a song. The whole thing kind of came to me in a flash, The town I was born and raised in was an interesting place. It was the last outpost of the Roman Empire. And they built a wall across the north of England from the west side to the east side. And the last place they built was called Segedunum, which means the end of the wall. And so I was born in Wallsend. They tore down my house and they revealed this Roman site, this fortress. The shipyard that was at the end of the street was built over a temple to Mithras. It was all these elements in this town, you know, it was an industrial town. It had a coal mine at one end and a shipyard at the other. I used to watch I think it must have been about maybe 11,000 workers go to the shipyard every morning past my house. And occasionally the Queen would come down the street in a big Rolls Royce to launch a ship. It would take a year to 18 months to actually build a ship from some of the superstructure to the whole thing. And then they'd launch it out into the river and it would go away to sea. And I suppose, if I was looking for a metaphor for the rest of my life, it would be that, someone who traveled, someone who left town and never came back. The song all this time was really about transience, the transience of culture, how one culture replaces another and then is in turn replaced. And what we think of as permanent is in fact far from permanent.